Yeah, so we're going to do it in English. My Italian is really not existing. That okay? Yeah, we have translation, I think. I just wanted to surprise Carlos a bit and start with a video that I found yesterday. It's a piece of, it's an extract, I guess, of a lecture given by Philippe Parreno in 1977. And I'm going to play it and I can talk about it and why I'm putting that as in exergue now to the conversation we're going to have. The sound is really bad, so you have to really pay attention. Sorry. Oops.
The subject of this speech is a topic which has been discovered recently and which may not exist at all. I may be talking about something that does not exist. Therefore, I'm free to say everything or nothing. I, in my stories and novels, often write about counterfeit worlds, semi-real worlds, as well as deranged private worlds, inhabited often by just one person, while meantime the other characters either remain in their own worlds throughout or are somehow drawn into one of the peculiar ones. This theme occurs in the corpus of my 27 years of writing. At no time did I have a theoretical or conscious explanation for my preoccupation with these pluriform pseudo-worlds, but now I think I understand. What I was sensing was the manifold of partially actualized realities lying tangent to what evidently is the most actualized one, the one which the majority of us, by consensus gentium, agree on. Later that day, back home again, but still deeply under the influence of the sodium pentothal, I had a short, acute flash of recovered memory. Then, in mid-March, a month later, the total body of memories, intact and entire, began to return. You are free to believe me or to disbelieve, but please take my word on it that I am not joking. This is very serious, a matter of importance. At that time, I had no idea what I was seeing. It resembled nothing that I had ever heard described. It resembled plasmic energy. It had colors. It moved fast. It collected and then dispersed. But what it was, what he was, I am not sure even now. In other words, it's a common theme in my writing that a dark-haired girl shows up at the door of the protagonist and tells him that his world is delusional, that there's something false about it. Well, this did finally happen to me. I even knew that her hair would be black. I had an actual complete sense of what she would look like and what she would say. She did appear, she was a total stranger, and she did inform me of this fact, that some of my fictional works were in a literal sense true. I wrote out these dreams in novel after novel, story after story, to name two in which this prior ugly present obtained most clearly. I cite The Man in the High Castle and my 1974 novel about the U.S. as a police state called Flow My Tears, the Policeman Said. I'm going to be very candid with you. I wrote both novels based on fragmentary residual memories of such a horrid slave state world. People claim to remember past lives. I claim to remember a different, very different present life. I know of no one who has ever made this claim before, but I rather suspect that my experience is not unique. What perhaps is unique is the fact that I'm willing to talk about it. We are living in a computer-programmed reality, and the only clue we have to it is when some variable is changed and some alteration in our reality occurs. We would have the overwhelming impression that we were reliving the present, déjà vu. perhaps in precisely the same way, hearing the same words, saying the same words, I submit that these impressions are valid and significant. And I will even say this, such an impression is a clue that at some past time point, a variable was changed, reprogrammed as it were, and that because of this, an alternative world branched off.
I hope you get a bit of you understood the words. The reason why I wanted to play that was not really only because it was funny, and it's not also because of the cliche of a really unstructured artist versus a really structured curator, but because there is something there in what Philippe Parreno struggled at the end of his life to point out, was the fact that how can you explain the chain of ideas that I have? It's more than that than anything else, really. It's nothing to do about the parallel reality, the kind of like weird idea or like 70s idea, influenced by drugs of like whether this is real or not. It was more about questioning the fact that as a writer, and he was writing non-stop, how could we explain the fact that one idea leads you to another? And this, for me, as a principle, I think, of my understanding of art and my practice of art. Since I left the art school, I always engaged with people throughout a conversation kind of methodology of work. And so why is that between Philippe Parreno and this conversation method is the fact that in a way what we also been doing with Carlos since the last maybe now 4 years is also something which is for me still really magical. It's like how do you you meet somebody and then an idea comes out from a conversation, from one sentence leading to another. So it's also what's at work with Carlos, I think, and what I also really and more focused on since the last 5 years is this principle of automation. One idea leading to another, one word leading to another, one statement leading to another. What it that works that Leibniz defined as being the spiritual automaton. It's always nice to quote Leibniz in a lecture. Is I think what is for me at stake in what constitutes for me the core of art and art practice. We spoke with Carlos at the beginning when he worked on Duchamp exhibition about Raymond Roussel, who introduced this idea of the process. The process is what counts. The rest is basically purely formal kind of abjection. And I am not. I mean, I'm still. This is for me, of course, the birth of the avant-garde. But those principles those automatic principles, or this process, is something that I've always been engaged with as in a conversation form, and now more recently into an exhibition form. But nevertheless, it's the same modus operandi at work.
But there's it's that when the statement starts, he starts saying it's really interesting at many levels, and I'm hoping that commenting on the statement will take me to the work, but I need to stay a little bit with the statement because I think there's certain things that are very key. Well, the delivery is one. I mean, there's this sort almost like bureaucratic, right? There's something that, almost this very formal delivery, right? And what he's doing is quite structured. His language is quite structured. But he's basically talking about saying, that there's... I operate from the assumption that there's something present and something absent. And that's the basic of my thinking and of my being. But then I found out in the process of my life, that the absence takes over the presence, you know? And there's something really monstrous about that, and it made me think about the way in which you know, the familiarity with which you deal with that tension, you know? With the tension between what's present and what's absent. And that's, I think it's strange, because in so many ways, you know, we are very accustomed to think of art in relationship to certain events or objects, things that are, to a, you know, a more or less degree, they're tangible in one way or another. But I think that what you have been trying to do quite systematically is to think about art beyond that. You know, we went to see a movie together almost by chance in Paris in the summer, right? And it was really hot in Paris, right? And I was slightly sick at that time. And you took me to see this movie. Who is Robin Wright? Was the movie, or
don't remember.
I know that Robin Wright was.
Yeah, that's the title of the film, no?
And the director, you know the director quite well. It's an Israeli director.
We did Dance with Bashir. I don't remember his name now. Maybe people know the film. Yeah.
Well, it basically was about the film industry, and it was a sci-fi movie. And in the movie, the actress was basically bought by a film company. And what they did was they appropriated the character, so they scanned her, and they could use it for any movies in any ways. And then there was a subsequent stage in which this sort of utter appropriation of subjectivity became transformed into a sort of drug, right? So anybody could just inject himself or herself with a drug, and they would become the actress, right? So it was this kind of like completely monstrous, you know? And I went out of the movie like feeling really, you know, unease, and Philippe was completely, he said, oh, it's wonderful, you know?
No, but what I like in the, sorry, it's really loud. Am I loud? I'm not shouting, I'm just talking. No, what I like about that little piece of statement of Kedic is the fact, of course, you know, that the parallel words, you know, he was a king of them, but in a way, what he said, I think for me is much more intriguing, is the fact that how come that these words that thought were fictional becomes real, or as real as the others, you know? Or maybe they are, in fact, the only reality that exists. So that behind that, there's something that works, operates, functions, that can produce anything. And in fact, is that what people may call reality, you know? I mean, that's the way in fact, he put it. And I think for me, that, of course, you know, we can talk about fiction, metafiction, parallel world, but that's not really something that never really interests me, because for me it's a gimmick. What's more interesting is what's behind it, what is at work, what are the mechanical forces that operate, that produce something similar to reality, you know, proto-real. And when, of course, you dig inside those kind of like spheres, you may end up being a bit sick or dizzy out of it, because things are more blurry. And they're more blurry because maybe there's something more kind of essential, you know, in that. So, yeah, sorry.
No, well, it's
just something to start with, and I thought it was
because one is used to think in those oppositions, and also one is used to think about tangible thing, about oneself in terms of tangible things. And one of the, to summarize it in a way, we were working. Philippe and I met on occasion of an exhibition in Philadelphia called Dancing Around the Bride, which was an exhibition in which we tried to deal with the legacy of Duchamp through 4 American artists: Jasper Johns, Robert Rauschenberg, Merce Cunningham, and John Cage. And of course, Duchamp has a very important presence in Philadelphia, because the museum has the largest collection of Duchamp, and some of his 2 of his masterpieces, the Large Glass and Étendonné. And some of these artists also have a very, they gravitate very powerfully in the institution. And so the challenge for that exhibition was how to animate it, how to bring it to life, how to make it accessible to somebody, to the viewer, not as a sort of reliquary exhibition or an archival exhibition, but something that could be alive. And I struggle with that, and I saw the exhibition that Philippe did at the Serpentine Gallery in London, which was choreographed. So as basically the viewer would be going from one room to the other room, following sounds and following the image, and the exhibition functioned as a whole, as a sort of machine, right? Mm-hmm. You got in and you got out, and the exhibition was absorbing completely. And so we started our collaboration, and Philippe did what we call the mise en scène for Dancing Around the Bride, and it really allowed the entire material to breathe in a completely different way. And there were a number of really wonderful conversations that we had at the time, and things that Philippe said that I believe are also very important to understand the work that he did before and the work that he did after. And one of the things was we wanted to work with the Cunningham dancers. But of course, we couldn't have the Cunningham dancers dancing continuously in the space. And so the question was, what happens when they're not there? It's a perfect question for Philippe, because I think he thrives on what's not there. And he said, well, we can have the ghosts. And the ghosts of the dancers were basically produced by recording them in a studio and then using a rather complex system that allow us to install speakers below the dance floor, and you could actually hear the vibrations and the sounds of the dancers when they're not there. And we were discussing about, Philippe came to the installation, but in advance of the installation was very long, so before Philippe came, I asked him about the equipment. Where shall we put the equipment, right? And I said, shall we leave it there, And I was coming out of working with Bruce Nauman in the biennial, for Nauman, it's really, you see most of the cables and you see most of the stuff around. What's there is there. And Philippe said, not at all. No, we're going to, of course we have to hide it. And I told him, well, so how do you deal with what's there and what's not there? And he said, well, I also think of myself as a modern artist, but I think that we have to rethink modernity in terms of the relationship between the virtual and the real, And that's a little bit the same thing that Dick is talking about.
Yeah.
But the question is, what does that mean for you?
I think the invitation that you made me to work with in the show, with you on the show in Philadelphia was strange, because it's the first time I've been asked to do my work without showing my work, and I really liked it, because it's as you know, I've been always thought that art was nothing but a way for a form to negotiate its appearance and disappearance, in a way. So an exhibition is not a display of objects. An exhibition is a negotiation for forms to become public. And they negotiate that with artists, they negotiate that with the museography or the museums or the curators, but it's a form of negotiation. So a display of objects should be called something else, in fact, at exhibition, because as we know, exhibition started at birth with cinema, when at the time cinema was also as well like exhibitions, a way to tell stories or to tell the world to the people. And exhibition was doing the same thing. The big exhibition of the 19th century was all about that, showing the world to people, not only showing artworks, but the world. And then cinema took over the side of the storytelling, narration, dramaturgy, and left to exhibition the display of objects. And I do believe that there's a common trunks here, that we have to renegotiate or reinvent. And so when you asked me to do this, remember we talked about how we're going to name your intervention, because you're not, basically it's Rauschenberg, Jasper Jones, Merce Cunningham, John Cage. and Miss Somebody and Duchamp. And you will be the guest, and we say, no, mise en scène. And it's the first time, in a way, I use that terms of mise en scène or choreography. You used it before. For me, something quite new in like maybe a few years ago, 2 or 3 years ago, I never used that word before. And it's true that the exhibition at the Serpentine was a way for me, I was kind of aware that I was more interested by the way people will move through the space, guided either by change of sound or change of light, and choreographed. What is choreographed? Choreographed attention. We know that the economy of attention is at the center of our liberal system, and so attention, but attention in non-authoritarian way. People may decide to. There's no beginning and no end, first of all, and you may decide to leave at any time. There's no progress in a way, but only a series of scenes, next to each other. And then people will move from one to another. But what I liked, and I don't have the pictures here, but what I liked about the show at Serpentine is, because at some point I asked for a photographer to take pictures of, as you do, and I asked him not to take the pictures of the works, but to take the pictures of movement of the people into the space.
But when you were doing the show, did you think about that choreography as separate from the works?
I thought it will be more interesting for me to see how people will move throughout the space. And so when this photographer sent me the pictures, I saw the movement of people, in the space, and I thought this is, in a way, the choreography, I'm talking about, this choreography of the people through the space. And more than that, I think, what does it mean really behind that? I think there's the tradition, in a way, to look at art has something to do with the aristocracy. It's me against you, my taste against your taste. And art and art reading or art expertise has much to do with this principle of aristocratic point of view. And but when it comes to exhibition sometimes, and especially those exhibitions, that you notice that I was noticing that was interesting for me to see people being together. So cinema, theater is typically a collectivist kind of like a practice, because you put people in the dark, and lectures as well, at the beginning and the end. But in my case, I was intrigued by the things which are temporary collectivists. It's not that we have to be all together all the time, but for a moment. And
so you want people to be conscious of being together.
Yeah. So, and I think that's what struck me when I did the Serpentine. So, when you asked me to do the show to do this mise en scène in Philadelphia, I was more interested, in fact, to focus on that because it didn't have in my work. I have like some masterpieces, but I was intrigued to see how that could be negotiated. How can the mind, in a way, be choreographed, and the attention be choreographed.
Because the conversations that we had were mostly about how long the cycle should be, how much would the people tolerate, when it would be. Basically, the Serpentine, there was a cycle that lasted how long, Philippe?
The Serpentine was a cycle of 45 minutes, I think, or between 45 and I don't remember now.
I think it was around 45 minutes.
Yeah.
Yes. And so the conversations that we had were, well, should it be longer? Would the people tolerate something that is longer or not?
See, that, for example, the fact to link an exhibition to a time, space, is something that I wrote a text in 92, I believe, called Postman Time, was all about that. I mean, I was a young artist. I was just noticing that, because I was guiding people in museums as a way of making my living, and I was noticing that people were inclined to spend more time looking at a painting if the label was bigger. Because obviously, it means that it's more important work than the other, whatever. But it's like basically the museography already says or gives a time reading to the viewers. So I did an exhibition a few years later with Hans-Ulrich Fabrice called Il Tempo del Postino, which was basically addressing this issue of what if we give the artist, it was a group show, artists the time for them for the work to appear and disappear, So they will say, okay, we have a stage, and we can decide how long you want the work to be seen. So some artists like Kuyunga did, a piece that lasted 30 seconds. Matthew Barney took more time. So, so we have a complete range between 30 minutes and an hour and a half. And what was interesting for me is that during the course of the preparation of this group show, I had a long chat with Matthew Barney, and he said something really stunning. He said to me that we are more or less the same generation, more than less, in fact, and he said that when we, as kind of like generation of artists, were taking the video or camera to make film, it was actually not to make film, but to record art in time. And I found it quite interesting that it was a tool of measurement, which is quite right for his practice, and quite right for my practice as well. The medium is not important. It's the fact that you can measure the moment when things are going to come and disappear. So I think art has to be always, for me it was always kind of that, was always at the heart, of the practice. So
Well, at the Palais de Tokyo, you in a way you moved it to make the entire experience of the exhibition very, very present, more present than ever before.
Yes. So after the bride came this invitation to take over the entire space, and I was interested to see if this idea, what I was talking about, this idea that you could actually be with people looking through a space, was something I could explore more. And one of the keys that I had from the beginning, as we spoke about it because you were, working with me on that show, was the garden. Going back to Leibniz, it's strange, Leibniz twice.
You want to say that?
Yeah, because it was interesting reading. It was a little text. I don't remember now the name of the author. That is going to come back to me later. It was something about the fact that I'm really bad in history, but it was the 18th century, right?
I think it's a formal garden.
Yeah.
The design.
The Hanover garden. And Sophie from Hanover were basically on the verge of building this garden that exists now. And she was in conversation with Leibniz, and they decide whether they will do the English garden style or the French garden style. And Leibniz, of course, says, the perspective is more interesting because nature, when something falls, it falls in direct line, doesn't go like that. So, in fact, the perspective is better. Let's hope for the French garden. And what he said is that gardens are interesting because they are producing silhouettes. If you walk in a park in a straight line, you see at a distance people, backlit. So that for me was a key of the show, to try to always follow a silhouette in an exhibition, and therefore, through your movement throughout the space, producing a sense of a garden, a walk in a garden. Does that make sense?
I think it could be useful at this point to show some of the sequence, so then we can talk a little bit about the generative mechanism for that sequence of the Palais de Tokyo.
So I'm going to try, the pictures, I try to classify them, but okay. So this was the beginning. After that, I show you something funny, but hold on. So that was the entrance of the show.
So it was a marquee.
It was a marquee outside the space, just this was the beginning, so to speak. And as you see, there was two lights, one daylight, blue color, and at night it was a sodium color. So in order to match it with with the street lights and the temperature of the color of the street light. That was important because the show was peculiar in a way that he was opening at 12 and ending at midnight. So I wanted to play with a day and night situation.
And the Marquis that you've been making for a while now, they're interesting in themselves because they are, slightly obsolete. I mean, you don't see a lot of theaters with Marquis, but they were designed to mark the entrance of a spectacle, right? And so it almost says that there's a temporal dimension that you will be accessing, which is interesting because usually when one goes to a museum, one thinks that that the temporal dimension is somehow frozen or signified statically. But I think that the Marquis says that the experience of time would be different than that, would be more dynamic.
What I like with the Marquis is that basically they made everything and they mean nothing, and I started doing that because I was always curious by, we talk about label and labeling has been my obsession. And I thought, so I used to do even shows only with labels and no works. And to the point when I say, what if the label takes over the place for the artwork and becoming, the artwork themselves. So, and that was for me the Marquis, extremely decorative, trying to say something but doesn't say anything, So it's a bit like an alien kind of form.
So wait a second because I want to. So for what would you say that you love about the Marquis, or that attracted you to the Marquis, is that it is a sign that points to itself as a sign?
Yes, exactly.
As a sign in the sense that signals to something.
Yeah.
So it's a sort of self, how do you call it, tautological sign.
Yes, exactly.
That.
But what I'm saying, it says nothing and everything. It's stuck in. It's like a loophole. It just repeats itself. And
at the same time, it depends on a certain architecture. So it's not a self-sufficient sign, right? It's a sign that depends on a lot of things, on context.
Yes. And so that was the beginning. And then when you will come in, and then you will understand the idea of the silhouette is that basically you will come in, and I designed the bank where you buy
the office desk.
The office desk when you buy your ticket, and it was really, really bright. So that was a new, something of design, or like a new work, so to speak. So what you will see basically is, before doing anything, is that you will see silhouettes backlit by strong light. And then the second thing that you will see in the space will be the fact that all the windows will be blurred. So that was another decision I took.
And the windows at the Palais Tokyo are very large. If some of you might have been there, I mean, they're really quite immense. So to make them blur was, it's very subtle, and at the same time it was very complicated.
And then when you will come in the space, you will notice all the sconces of the Palais Tokyo, which were actually existing sconces, were flickering in a strange way, like literally flickering. So all of them had a little chip, and they were all playing. There were 42 of them playing 42 variations of something that you will discover later. You don't know exactly why they're doing what they're doing, but there's a reason to it. So you introduce, it's like this paranoia, there's a logic, but you don't know what it is, so you feel a bit, I just do the walkthrough if I can.
And the flickering took you through the entire space, so that was a sort of...
then you will see labels, and the labels will, I really badly organized my pictures, but we will make it. The labels were basically a hacked Kindle. Mm-hmm. Maybe I can say that. It's a device.
So they flickered also?
Flickered. So they will flicker between basically the labeling of the work and the book that I wrote called Snow Dancing. So you were basically from going from one label and being able to look to the, to have an idea of what the book was made of and when, but also following a story.
And the story of the book is also the story of a space.
Yeah.
No?
And then, and then you will go, and then you will go there. More pictures. Sorry. So then you will go and you'll see floating ceilings that also, something that also was created. Floating ceilings that lead you to this gigantic,
That's moving left from the desk.
Yeah.
So there's a floating ceiling, and towards the end there's a large screen.
A large screen that I'm just going through the pictures because so you got an idea. And that was during the production. So you will see you will see that the pictures basically that's day and night is quite different. The show is completely different day and night. And so that basically is the point when you come in and you see that. So it's again basically a big LED screen, and again people backlit by it. So producing silhouettes. Yeah.
And the films that you showed in the screen were films that you had made before.
Yeah. So they were basically the place of the retrospective, the film that I did at the beginning, from the first film I did at the art school to one of the latest one. There was a series of 6 or 7 of them. And so you will walk into the space, and where the people are there, you will be able to see perfectly the picture and listen perfectly to it. And the more further closer to the screen you will go, the less sound you will get and the less information you will have, because the pictures will become more and more abstract. I show you.
So the experience was the experience of basically losing information.
Losing information, which is rather the opposite of normally what you do when you look at art. The closer you get, the more information you have.
Or at least, that's what you.
It was the opposite. And what I liked is the fact that when you will pass by the screen then and turn around, in cinema you call it what do you call the terminology of? I don't remember it now. Champ contre champ, you say it in English, whatever. You go back and then you see people looking at the picture lit by it. So, see what I mean? I like both of them. This one when people are looking, and then the other one when you are passing and you see people looking.
But in this work, if I remember correctly, I mean, you had first very clear the idea of the effect that you wanted. It's almost like you were starting to think from the technology point of view, or not. I mean, I think it's different from other videos in the show.
It was the first perspective because it's really the space being so big. I was interested by the fact that it was so big, so I thought, it should rather again like this idea of the perspective, something is there from a distance you see it, so you see it perfectly, and you don't need to go closer to it, but you do, because that's what you do when you enter a space, you want to know more. So you're basically tricked, you go, and the more you go, the less information you have, and then you start with a piano. Sounds like a really bad movie. Then you hear a piano, and the piano was behind the LED screen, and I'll show you what it looks like. Voilà. So you have this piano. We stand into some of the stairs existed and some were added, so it becomes like the stairs becomes bleachers, so to speak. And on this piano was black snow falling, and the piano was playing by itself. It's this clavier piano that we use in Philadelphia. So the piano played by itself, Petrushka. And in fact, when I mentioned the flickering lights, moving according to 42 of them, holding differently, was basically the 42 movement of the piano of Petrushka. And Petrushka tells the story also of an automaton.
So that's when we get to the logic of the entire show. And it's interesting because in Philadelphia, we had two these clavier pianos, but they were playing cage, right? So they were it was, you can say, an intervention that you made that was playing two of the works in the exhibition.
Yeah.
But here they were playing something that is completely unrelated in a way. But Petrushka, can you tell us a little bit the story of Petrushka?
So let's go back to Philippe Kedic. Is that I needed to go, Raymond Roussel, I needed to get something to structure the exhibition. I said, why should I, I can be my taste, or it can also be something more random. So what I choose out of a conversation again, one thing leading to another, I was suggested to maybe meet a pianist called Michael Rodi, who's a virtuoso, who's able to play Petrushka was played for 2 pianos, and he can play it with 2 hands. So it's again, like for me, it was again like a man machine, so to speak, able to do something that the others can do. And so Michael played me the Petrushka, which lasted 34 minutes, I think, and I asked him to play it in 31 minutes, because that was exactly the time I needed in order to break all the films into equal parts. So 31 minutes was exactly a third of Zidane, was exactly the length of Marilyn, and so forth and so forth. In mathematics, you call it the plus petit dénominateur commun in French, a common denominator to a lot of numbers, Mm-hmm. And that was basically my encoding device, was a Petrushka piece. And all the piano movement leads to an event in the show.
You had chosen Petrushka because it's a story of a puppet.
And then, of course, but that's again the Philippe Kedic stuff, then things come quite handy by chance, seems to have a nice and great meaning, but the meaning came after. I didn't think about Petrushka first because it was also a story of a puppet who comes to life. It came after the discussion I had with Michael, and I thought, well, that's interesting because it comes together. That thing, it comes together, it's magical.
So
why it comes together.
In a way, what's interesting and what was possibly, how clear do you think it was for the viewers of the show that the logic was encoded in Petrushka? Do you think
you will know it? You will know it because you will see, for example, right at the beginning, you will see the different themes launched when the piano was playing something. So we'll already make kind of like the link between one and the other. And at the end of the day, I didn't really care. People will make at the end they will, or people will tell them, or they will heard about it. But it was, you are in a machine that works for you or against you, but you are in a process of discovering things, one leading to another. And and you see, so when you pass the bleach and it turn back, because the piano will play, you again have another perspective, because the piano is framed by the windows. And then you will follow another sound of piano. Or maybe I can show you also these pictures. That was pictures in the exhibition. You will see a control room where another piano was playing, and this was basically directly plugged in all the computers of the show. So the piano, so maybe to answer your question, that's how you find out that the piano is a machine behind it.
And there is, and we were talking about the generative, we were talking about Roussel and using language as a generative logic from which the works come. And here in this case, the generative logic is Petrushka. I mean, Petrushka is made into the generative logic for the show. So in a way, you could say that the show was that logic.
Yeah.
But at the same time, the show was very tangible and the works were very strong. I mean, there was an avenue of Marquis. I mean, the works were experientially very powerful. So how do you reconcile those two aspects? The fact that on the one hand, the show is in a way a mathematical sequence, something very abstract, and at the same time is so clearly material and present and experiential.
I don't know. I will show you maybe after the way this is the way I did the show. So basically, this is the exhibition without the architecture. It's the organ without the body. And so that's how I worked. I really started to play. It's a bit like when you compose, I guess, music, although I never did that. The process was really all about that, trying to lead, one event to another, and then find out why doing it. That Petrushka was quite convenient doing it. So in this room, for example, the light will go on and off, and pulses will glow in the night. It's called Fade to Black Street. Maybe I have more pictures of that somewhere. I have to say pictures. And boop, boop. Wow. Pictures. No. And then you will have a hidden library that you will push. I'll show you. Sorry, I'm not organized. So you see the piano, and you have the robot moving, and then you have on the side a door, which is a library, a hidden door, so to speak. So you will push and enter into this place where you will have a series of drawings. That was a show that happened it was for me important as well to do a soliloquy, since I like to do shows, exhibition, I wanted to do an exhibition about exhibition as well. So this for me was an exhibition that was really important because it's really moving, and we talked about it when we did the show in Philadelphia. It was an exhibition of Cage and Cunningham after the death of John Cage. Merce Cunningham displayed drawings of Cage and was moving one drawing of Cage every day, putting a drawing of his in place by playing with a yiking, So it was basically one dead for one living. And together being lover, I think was one of the most beautiful acts of love, but also exhibition ever made. And
there's a certain cruelty also out there, no?
Yeah, and I wanted to reenact it. So I asked the gallery to give me the same drawings, and the show was reenacted in a way behind this closed and hidden door. So you will see, and what you see now, the dots, which are colored dots, are basically the plaster that people will put in order to, when they move the drawing, in order to reveal the former presence of the other drawing. No, so randomly, basically, the art installer will move a drawing and then put some colors and replace by another. And so that was, the reenactment of this fantastic show that took place in 2002 in New York.
2002.
Yeah, and then you will have another robot next to the piano drawing. There's also a robot that will draw write something strange, and again you don't know exactly what and why is that, but you'll know about it later. And this was on and off, those little light I've been doing for a while called AC/DC Snakes, which I did in '92 when I did this show, Snow Dancing, weaving a space by the fact that all this aberration come out from the plugs unused by the museum. The robot. Okay, moving on.
So after this show,
yeah,
do you the logical part of the show, let's say the internal sequence, has become more important for you? I mean, because the question I think that a lot of people might have had when looking at the exhibition is, what is the work, or what is the work? Are the films the work? Is the entire show one work? I mean, it's not so easy. It becomes much more difficult to locate the work, right? I mean, I want. Is it that for you, or do you feel that?
Yeah, I don't know exactly where the work is as well, which is maybe the beauty of it. It's augmented, it's a work plus 2.0 or something. I don't know, it's art 2.0, or maybe it's art. I think a lot of people told me it's not an exhibition anymore. This is, for example, a display of the film Marilyn that you may have seen in Venice. At the end of the film, the light goes on, and you see a drift of snow behind the screen. And the reason why I did that is also because I found out that artificial snow is quite handy for the sound, to make it more acoustically, balanced. So, and also it all provides me an on and off. And there was a moment beautiful where the pen was drawing, and then behind you will see through the acoustic transparent screen, the pen drawing onto the snow. So, what I was saying? Yes, people ask me what if it was not an exhibition anymore. And I found it a bit strange that I still have to face this question. When I started making art, people were saying, what was the first thing I had? Was you are not making art because you are making things with people. We don't understand exactly what you're doing. Then, because I was working in collaboration, people say you're not even an artist since you sign with other people, And now that I do exhibitions, say people it's not exhibition because it's something else. So it seems that it's a doom. I don't know why. I think I'm making art, but I don't know why it's so complicated to name it, So to answer your question, I think it's just an exhibition, really, with some works in it. Or not.
I wanted to... Philippe knows that in the last few months I've been reading, motivated by a book by Roberto Calasso on the Shatapatha Brahmana. I've been reading some of the Vedas, some material from the Vedas, and there's a beautiful image that I think applies wonderfully to the show, which is in the Brahmanas, the Lord of Creation. It's called Prajapati. Now, Prajapati is sort of the passage between existence and non-existence. But interestingly, there's not a clear opposition between existence and non-existence. They both seem to be or not be, and Prajapati creates by dispersing his body, right? So at the end of creation, he's very weak, and he's in front of Miretu, which is death, right? And it becomes a direct confrontation with death. And I find it's very beautiful, this image of a Lord of creation that creates by this person, his body, and then ends up confronted with death. And he sees that everything that he had created dies, and that he himself will die. This is not an omnipowerful God, right? He himself will die. And of course, this creates deep anxiety. And until he realizes that there are relations among things. And those relations, there are two names that are used in the Brahmanas to describe these relations. One is Bandhu, and Bandhu is much more than... It's a symbolic relationship which is extremely strong. It's closer to what we call symbol, or to the etymology of symbolon, right? But it means a deep belonging, an analogy in which the elements of the analogy are deeply intertwined. But the answer for Prajapati is not Bandhus, but it's Sampat, and Sampat are numerical relations. Mm-hmm. So he understands that there's numerical relations among everything. Mm-hmm. And when he realizes that, he says, I might die, but those numerical relationships will not die.
Yeah. That's beautiful. Yeah. No? I love things. It's beautiful. I'm supposed to say something more clever than you. I can't. This was why I show you that? Well, yeah, that was the presentation of the film, and you see also it's again like the pictures when you see people looking at stuff, at things, which is for me also really interesting. That was also a film called CHZ that I did, and at the end of the film, you will see, which is at the film, you will see basically the pictures of the place where the film was shot, with a live camera streaming the pictures from Porto. I'm just finishing a bit, no, the last pictures, and then we can talk about something else. There was just, can you talk when I do that? No.
Anli?
Oh yeah, we can go to Anli. There was also a door that was moving, opening and closing, and each time the door was opening and closing, you will hear the sound of the street coming inside the space. As I told you, all the windows were blurred, so the only time when basically you have an access to the outside world was the moment when those doors were opening and closing. And they were opening and closing according to the movement of Petrushka. So from time to time they were dancing, and then the sound of the street of Paris coming inside the space. Then I show you the platform that we did, another version of it at least, in Philadelphia that was also shown.
So is this platform that we were talking about in terms of the ghost dancers?
So that was a platform in the center of the show. And as you can see, maybe with the pictures, although is that you shouldn't be able to see that. Yeah, you see the wall was turning around. So it was again another automation is that the wall was actually moving really slowly, the way just slow enough to understand that there is something weird going on, but not fast enough to understand that, oh wow, the wall is moving. And the wall was actually basically acting as a hand next to your ear to try to pay attention to the sound, the footsteps of the dancers of Merskenigham dancing. And that was also the center of the show. Then there was a street of Marquee that I called Danny's Street, which was, I'll show you, oops. So that was a Marquis installed in this long kind of like street, and the Marquis were moving also and producing music, sometimes in sync with Petrushka, sometimes producing their own music. And the bulbs basically had a microphone on them, so you will hear the sound of electricity going through the Marquis and producing a soundtrack. I'll show you pictures. You'll see now, yeah, see the way it was moving. And then, yeah. And then Anli, we have pictures. And then you had the street with this film called Anli, which I did some time ago, and this artist, Tino Segal, took it over some years ago. I don't know if you're familiar with the work. Anli was basically a project I did with Pierre Rig, and we bought a manga character from a Japanese company, and we bought it, and the character didn't really have any special talent or any peculiar story. It was a dumb character. And we played it and asked different artists to use a picture face, you know, and tell stories out with her. Her name was Anli. And so we created basically a group show with all these artists exchanging the same picture, you know, same motif. And again, creating a sort of collectivity, you know, behind the sign. That was basically the idea. And then in order to end the story, we gave up the copyright of the character to the character itself. So nobody can use a picture of Anli anymore. And Tino Segal, 5 years ago, told the story with an actress and young girls that were telling the story. And I found it interesting to play the film that started the project. And then when the film will end, a little girl will come and tell the story, which is what happened. And then there was Zidane also. And then that's it. I'll talk about something else now. And that was a presentation of this film that I did with Douglas Gordon. So there was also in the show a lot, you know, the library that was swinging was also a collaboration I did with Dominique Gonzalez-Forster. This was a piece I did with Douglas Gordon. So there was as well, it was also a monography, but it was also a polyphony in many ways, no? And this, for example, presentation was the film Zidane that we did some years ago. Was we had 17 cameras shooting one game and all the cameras being on Zidane. And what we did here is that we put the cameras in position where the projection where the cameras was. So you enter into a sort of weird holographic or prismatic vision of one event with all these cameras looking at the same character, slightly again paranoiac room, you know. And so that was the end of the show. So at the beginning you had basically daylight, and the more you will get into the exhibition, the less light you will have, until you will end into this room where all the cameras are following one man. So ending up in a sort of a dramaturgic way, you know, in a good manner here. Voilà. Sorry about the mess, the pictures are not really organized. Voilà.
I think we should open the floor to questions.
Yes.
And the questions can be in Italian and I will translate them for Philippe.
Ci sono delle domande. Angelo, per piacere possiamo alzare un pochino la luce in sala? Grazie. Se ci sono delle domande. Sì, è un po' veloce lo stacco dal buio alla luce. Okay. Laura.
Buonasera, volevo sapere l'installazione luminosa al Marquis, se è una installazione permanente, oppure quindi studiata appositamente per il locale, oppure se è stata solo un'esibizione.
It's not permanent. I mean, most of the time it's not permanent. Okay. It's still an object of art, so it's movable. But so far, only once, which I think the one here was produced for the show and will stay after. But it's still an object, you know. It's not completely Kontextkunst. You know, it can also be removed from the context.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So it was made from marquees that had originally been done for different spaces and different projects.
Which in a way why I kind of like them, because when I put them in this abstract blacked out room, they're all in a way a reminder for me of another space, or other spaces, you know, of former exhibitions. So they're legacies, because I don't do them like that. I do them if they have to see a door, an entrance. So they're in a way a leftover from exhibitions.
I think it's also interesting the exercise of, you know, we seem to think, okay, so entering that room, are these marquees individual objects or are they part of one work, right? And those categories, it's almost like we're categorizing, you know, the relationship between the elements that are part of an installation, right? And there's a certain either-or logic, you know, that I think is short-circuited in a work like this, because in this work, yes, they are individual objects, and they, you know, have their own history, and they have their own entity, but yes, they can be something else. You know, it's kind of like the exercise is kind of open up the object in terms of its relational possibilities, no? And I think that's what the entire show also, you know, was about, you could say, you know, even your inclusion or your collaborations with others, you know, it's kind of opening up also authorship to a certain degree in that sense, you know. I mean, it could be occasionally, you know, be open, and then it could come down again. I mean, there's no contradiction. I think that's what, you know, we started talking about virtual and real, and the fact that maybe, you know, there is no contradiction, or at least it's not posed in the terms in which we traditionally think of it. I think that's the really difficult invitation, you know, in terms of how to think about the work.
Buonasera. Volevo sapere di quella ragazza manga che era stata realizzata insieme a Tino Segal, se è stato fatto un film, quanto dura, se c'è un'edizione limitata, cosa avete poi sviluppato?
I didn't do a film. You asked me if I did a film
of the performance of Tino.
Yeah. I think people did, but you're not supposed to, because that's, you know, you're not supposed to either take pictures of the work. Therefore, no videos of the work. But it's a good question because, in fact, I'm going to make because it's strange. The story is really strange, no? Because Tino never told me that he will do this work of Van Lee. So, and I never told either Pierre Wig. So I learned about it when it happened. I was like, okay, So he already played with this idea of copyright and do I have to say something to somebody when I borrow a motif or a work from an artist or not? In fact, he chose not to because it's, so to speak, I'm part of the mise en scène. And I kind of liked it, but, and I bought the work, in fact. I said, okay, no, so I thought it was something nice to do. And now I have this work of Tino that I displayed in this show. And what I did is that I drew the performance. And so I may do a show with the drawings. I think it's quite a nice way to end the story, because it starts with the drawing, really. So maybe it could end with the drawings, with a series of drawings as well. So it's a good way. The recording is a question, yeah. So it could be an exhibition of drawings. You see, it's a bit like the same thing of the Marquis. I don't think about it. It just happens. The Philippe K. Dick story. The street of Marquee was never an idea. I never thought, I'm going to produce Marquee for 5 years and then put them into a big space and produce a street, But it happened to be something quite interesting to see that leftovers from former exhibitions coming together, producing in a utopia, was kind of interesting thing to do.
But at the same time, the moment in which, for us working in institutions, is a very big topic, the issue of copyright and images, and who detains the copyright of an image, and what are the authorizations that you need to obtain in order to allow people to photograph, a certain object or to put it online, and social media makes everything more complex. And I think that the whole issue of copyright is a really, really, really problematic issue. And so, the invitation, I think, is to look at these works also from that perspective. What is property? What is the relationship between images and property? Yeah. As embodied in Anne Lee, and then in the reflections that, in the degree of reflection that implies artists buying a character, but then, somebody like Tino appropriating the appropriation and doing, his own work, which is about this work. So I think that those were all aspects, that were very, in a way, very poetically expressed, but very, very clear in the show.
But in fact, you see, the copyright is funny because it's, you used to call it just conversation, and people start to become, or they believe that they are a small business, they come with a terminology of copyright that belongs to the industry. But between artists, it was just the fact that you will change a motif by either talking or drinking or fucking or doing things together. But there was never an issue of copyright, But it came out recently when people believed that there were some corporate units. And with Tino, I think it's, and also with the Anne Lee project, was really all about trying to point out those kind of issues, and is it possible today again for collectivity to be behind a sign, and which was what the project was all about, and even on the cover of the catalog of the project Anne Lee, we put a sign of the first sign of that in the Middle Age, not the proletarian but the beggars were trying to organize themselves, and they came with a sign, and that was the first sign of the upcoming proletarian revolution. So, you need also to be able to be behind the same sign in order to do something together, So that was one thing, and then.
And at the same time, the signs in the context of your work point to themselves.
Yes. And I want to say something else, but I forgot.
I interrupted you.
Because you interrupt me. Yeah. It was a good idea.
Buonasera, una domanda a cui vorrei rispondesse prima l'artista e poi il curatore. Cosa trasforma, cosa fa diventare un'idea, un'opera d'arte?
That's exactly what I would like to know. I don't know exactly. No, it's yes, I remember what I was to say. It's for me, it was always, how you say, I will basically talk about ideas to people, you know. That was how my way of, and I didn't have a studio at the time, but that was my way to, and I found interesting in a way that if you talk to somebody about an idea, or somebody talks to you about an idea, so you start to exchange, and then you start to create basically a world, you know, or a statement, or form an object. But when you think about what's a minimum definition you will give, or one can give to reality, so what is happening when I close my eyes, you know, when I'm not there. And an exchange idea is already a beginning of a form that exists and in the real world, you know, because if I'm not there, the person with whom I talked about that, of the form, will still carry it. So for me, it was already the beginning of the transformation of an idea into a form, you know, and I needed the other for it. So for me, and still today, art is by essence conversational. There's no art without conversation. If you don't find somebody to talk to, you talk to the gods, or to fairies, or I don't know, to your shoes, but you talk to somebody. And yeah, because it's, and so, but then of course, what leads you from one form to another, that's something much more complex, I think. That's why I mentioned that little interview talk to Kelly, because those principles of automation, mechanized, processual, is still, I think, something that if we want to address it, I think that's something that we still have to refer to what Husserl named the process, because there's something there still, especially today when we talk about post-mechanized world, you know, there's still something at work, even if it's not mechanized. It's automatized, you know, so not so far off. And your answer will be?
I think that to me, I was thinking about the words that signify that to me. I think that a work of art for me is un encantamiento. I don't know. I don't have the word in Italian, but it's something, you know, that it has the power. Come? Un incantesimo, che ha la possibilità di incantarti. No, and incantare it's that it gives you it charms you, right? It charms you. So it's about the possibility to charm you.
As a new, you know, there's a lot of in comic books, and it's with a lot of people pretending to be magicians, like Alan Moore, or.
Yeah,
and it's interesting because what I say that at the beginning there was a word, you know. So the grimoire was basically a way to articulate ideas in order to change consciousness, which is basically the notion of magic.
Because also, you know, to charm you, it means that you when you're charmed, you know, you're not quite yourself, you know. So that's, I think, a very profoundly transformative aspect of the work. So I would say an idea that is able to charm you, it's a work of art. Maybe.
Addetto ai lavori, welcome to our paradise Venice, Venezia. Monsieur Philippe, vorremmo sapere, per cortesia, se per il 2015, lei sa che abbiamo una grande biennale d'arte contemporanea, ha qualche progetto per il 2015?
Sorry, I didn't get the...
If you have any
next future, for the future.
For the future.
Yes, yes.
Yes, I have a couple of stuff I'm working on. One is it's a show that I have in 2015 at the Armory in New York, and it's Park Avenue, so I don't know if you know the space, but it's basically a big plateau, you know. And what I like about it is the fact that there's no architecture. So it's for me interesting to imagine an exhibition without an architecture, or to play the way around an exhibition that will produce its own architecture. And when I mean architecture, is a way the attention will, without walls, be guided through a space which is open. So it's a bit like what this fantasy of an organ without a body, but there's something there that I kind of I would like to. I'm going to have fun doing that. And then there's the opposite exhibition that I just came back yesterday or the day before from Barcelona, and I'm interested to do also a show at the MACBA, because the invitation is kind of strange, is to occupy the museum, but also the outside of the museum, because now the MACBA has a mayor building, but there's also few buildings around, and the plaza where the skateboarders are doing their tricks. And I'm interested to do a show with an exterior, because I never did a show who has an exterior and an interior. So that will be something interesting to deal with, because it will be quite close again to urban design, so to speak. To see how a civil activity can find their way throughout the museum, but also around in the vicinity of the museum. So yeah.
Abbiamo visto queste belle immagini dei progetti per il Palais di Tokyo. Allora mi piacerebbe sapere che ruolo ha il progetto, quanto tempo prende la progettazione e se questi rendering sono all'inizio o vengono dopo la realizzazione della mostra.
What?
So it's about the projectual phase.
Yes.
Angela liked very much, the model, and she was wondering, the image that you show with all the different elements in the space. And
oh yes, the sketch model you mentioned. Okay,
how long, if that comes at the beginning of the project, how important the projectual phase is?
It was a year and a half of work. So it was a long process of. And it's not at all about money or whatever, because budget was there and we had to raise some, but it was not really the main issue. The main issue was really to try to do something that I never did before, and it's always complicated. I didn't, but it's again one thing led to another. For example, the piano. I knew I wanted to have a piano for some reason, because it's always nice to have a piano in exhibition, as we saw after the Bride.
Right.
And I remember a piano that Liam Gillick did for this piece, this shows that I curated called Postman Time. And he did basically a piano with black snow. It was a disc piano. It was him trying to remember a song. And he said to me, "Listen, it's going to be a big mess to do this show. So when something goes wrong or when nothing happens, you can play the piano and black snow will fall." And I kind of said, okay, maybe I should use the same piece of Liam, because Liam basically said to me, you can use this work in order to mark time or to mark a series of events into a space, So it was a time marker, and I asked Liam, "May I use your piano? But I'm going to make another music, or I'm going to use differently." And he said, "Well, it's your piece. You can do with it what you want." So the work also became strange because it was a piece of Liam, but used in a different way for the, because it was not exactly his piece. It was Liam plus kind of me, and. It's the same for the library, that swing, that was already something that I did years ago in the gallery in New York. And I asked Dominique if she had an idea to do, as she likes to make, or to create this beautiful notion of libraries. And introduce this idea of metafiction to art. So maybe you have some ideas about creating a library that can address some of the topics of the show. So it became a work of Dominique, so to speak, but then when the show went down, I think I asked her, it's like, listen, what do we do with the books? And she said, maybe, I don't know, keep them, or maybe, I don't know. In fact, it became, well, maybe we can make it as a work of you and me. But it was not clear. So it's not clear at the beginning what you're doing, just doing what you're doing. And then you realize what it means or it is, And, but the entire show was basically built like that, as a kind of like exquisite corpse of some sort. And of course, you go into one direction, it leaves you to a dead end, so you have to go back and start again until you go to the end of the journey.
Ciao, buonasera. Io forse ho una domanda un po' banale, però mi interesserebbe sapere un po' il tuo sviluppo d'artista. Nel senso, nel corso degli anni ho seguito abbastanza il tuo lavoro, un po' l'Italia, un po' all'estero, e mi ha stupito con la mostra che ho visto a Parigi il mese scorso, come improvvisamente c'è stata una sorta di consacrazione nella tua opera, quindi una mostra di così grande scala, cosa ha significato per te? E un po' quello che mi interessa sapere è se riscontri dei limiti in questa evoluzione e se un po', molto semplicemente, do you miss being a younger artist? C'è qualcosa nel modo in cui creavi 20 anni fa che magari sentivi che avevi più libertà o comunque meno costrizioni nella progettazione e nella produzione?
I had less money. For sure, and I would not like to go backwards, What I say now, it's kind of, it's a funny thing to say, yes, and some people say, oh, you're not even an artist. Not even that you don't make works, but you're not even an artist. You have to swallow it, And so it became, over time, problematic, I think. Because you don't really want to reinvent the wheel, But you understand also that there's some things which are, I don't know, like I always had the feeling that modernity is never given. It has to be reinvented all the time, Not because people are brainless, but because that's the nature of modernity needed to be reinvented. So ideas has to be rediscovered. And I thought maybe, it's going to be an endless journey, But then I had some good time. I don't know.
I think it's also, I don't know, but I think that, because I don't think that you said that you had a lot less money, but I don't think you have a lot of money now.
But I had definitely less money than now, but not that I have a lot of money now.
What you have now is more the possibility to find money to produce things, right? That's what I believe.
No, but honestly, people maybe don't remember. I'm not so old, but it seems like I'm like but I'm a young guy. But I remember, the first work that have been presented to a national collection, I can't tell you which one, was Snaking. I remember it was a film I did with Pierre Joseph, and I was really eager to know if the museum will acquire the work. For us, it was a big, change. Not only that the prestige of museum buying your work, but and they said to us that it was not an artwork. Literally, they didn't say we don't like the work, right? We don't want to buy it because we prefer to buy something more interesting. They just said to me, it's not art. So you go, okay, fuck, I'm really I'm going to have some problems, And so it was, but then you also understand that it's there's of course you are. I'm convinced, as you are when you're an artist. So and also privileged in a way that you are. I was surrounded by also a group of. I was producing in a way my own world, So I didn't see really the danger or the problems around because I was, not paying attention much. But then but I will not do it again.
Regarding the issue of non-art, there is an interesting article by Thierry Dedouve in the most recent issue of Art Forum because he's been writing about a sort of archaeology of Duchamp, and this is about the genealogy of the non-art definition. Yeah. And it's really interesting, it's refreshing to remember that it really, if one would look at the moment in which the category of non-art became so important, art historically, it was really the Salon des Refusés, right? So, when there was this group of people who were refused from the official salon that sanctified the very definition of art. So we're really talking about the 19th century here in a very interesting way. So I would say that the category of non-art has been parallel to the development of it's kind of constitutive of the logic of modernity. It's opposite, but at the same time, it's kind of there.
That's why today, when I see a young artist, I was interested by when it doesn't look like something familiar. I pay more attention because it's kind of interesting to see things that come from a place where you're not supposed to come or something. But yeah. But now it's all cool.
Maybe we can have a couple more questions. I'm looking at Martin to see what. Yes? Good. We can have 2 more questions, if there are more questions. Baby there.
I would like to know more about the robot. I'm very fascinated by it.
The robot was I can show you maybe.
And also if it's the same machine that appears at the end
in
of
the film Marilyn, that is basically an attempt to do a phantasmagoria. Marilyn is a portrait of Marilyn Monroe. And what I did is that I used machines to simulate a voice. So it's an algorithm that makes her speak. And I created a place where she spent time in New York. And so the camera was also a digital camera run by the same algorithm that produced the voice. And then the handwriting was also produced by the same algorithm, being a little mathematical mechanic. So the same algorithm basically produced the voice, the eyes, and the handwriting, which is called biometry. So basically, it's like with this formula, I could create or recreate a human being. And the robot that you saw basically was a mechanic part of the machine that was reproducing Marilyn Monroe handwriting. So in the show, you will see the robot first saying, "Okay," so robot writing, and then later on you will see the film, you got it.
It's very sad, the film. It's very sad, no?
It was a time when I was really sad. Voilà.
Se non ci sono altre domande, ringraziamo ancora Philippe Parreno, Carlos Basualdo e voi per essere venuti. Buona serata a tutti.
Grazie.